It's being variously described as carnage, massacre, lynching. More than 200 cases of attacks on Hindus have been reported in Bangladesh. Temples were attacked, homes destroyed, and businesses vandalized. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called for the safety and protection of Hindus and all other minority communities in Bangladesh. Modi's stayed-on message when the head of Bangladesh's interim government, Muhammad Yunus, called him. Yunus's telephone call to Modi followed his visit to the Dhakeshwari temple, where he reassured his country's Hindu minority of their safety. Now, his temple visit came in the wake of protests by Hindus who held a rally at Shahbag in Dhaka and the northeastern port city of Chattogram. The situation is alarming. Hindus have been raped and murdered. The Bangladesh Hindu Buddhist Christian Unity Council and the Bangladesh Pujo Udjapon Porishad say that attacks on Hindus were reported from 52 of Bangladesh's 64 districts. Clearly, the violence was spread out across the country. Now, a popular folk musician and frontman of the band Jolair Gan, Rahul Ananda's home was looted and burned down, forcing the singer and his family to go into hiding. More than 3,000 handcrafted musical instruments were destroyed in the arson. Now, Salahuddin Shoaib Chaudhary is the editor and publisher of Blitz in Dhaka. He fears that Bangladesh might become another Afghanistan.
Hindus have never been safe in this country. I mean, never. And they are not safe even now. But even now, the situation is very worse.
Suhag Shukla is a co-founder and the executive director of the Washington, D.C.-based Hindu American Foundation. She shares a view that Hindus have borne the brunt of political unrest in Bangladesh over the decades. She says that what is happening in Bangladesh today is a classic example of Hinduphobia. All of which raises some uncomfortable but pertinent questions. 1. What is Hinduphobia? 2. Where all is it spreading and why? 3. Could Hinduphobia be a consequence of India's rise, which is envied by the world? 4. How and why did India raise the issue of Hinduphobia in the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly? 5. Why is the world not sitting up and taking notice of hatred towards non-Abrahamic religions? And 6. One keeps hearing about Islamophobia, anti-Semitism and Christianophobia, but why is the world silent on hatred, bigotry and discrimination against Hindus? Now, I'll come to that in just a bit, but first, allow me to take you back a few years to January of 2007. Do you know who this is? Many Indians would immediately recognize her. It's Shilpa Shetty, an Indian actor. She is a victim, or should I say survivor, of a vile racist attack in the UK on the sets of a reality game show on British TV. The show was called Celebrity Big Brother. Now, Ofcom, the British media regulator, received among the largest number of complaints in its history. Why? Because Shilpa Shetty was racially abused and verbally assaulted by contestants. One contestant called her Shilpa Papadam. Now, papadam or papad is a thin, round, crisp Indian bread, fried or roasted. Calling anyone let alone an Indian poppadom, is a racist slur. Another contestant had something to say about cooking in India. Now, this contestant said that she did not know where all Shilpa Shetty's hands had been. It was deeply offensive and it provoked protests in India. By the way, Shilpa Shetty went on to win the reality show. Cut to 2022. A video went viral online. It showed a man hurling abuses at a woman and an Indian man. The accused can be heard using the word Pajit at least 4 times.
Hey, Pajit. Pajit, you're a biological weapon in this country. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're a white woman. What are you going to do? Mix your genetics up with the shit skin?
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do I mean? There's 1.3 billion of those Pajits.
What are you talking about me like that?
There's 1.3 billion Pajits.
Just leave us, okay?
This is the whitest country on earth.
Now, much like poppadom, Pajit is a racist slur. It is specifically used for targeting Hindus, Indians, or persons of Indian origin. Now, a 2022 report published by researchers from Rutgers University in the US, titled Anti-Hindu Disinformation, a case study of Hinduphobia on social media, says Pajit is used in reference to Hindus and Indians interchangeably, with the majority of derogatory characterizations targeted towards Hindus. Now, anti-Hindu hatred was also reported in 2022, again from another part of Europe, this time in England, the city of Leicester to be precise. A saffron flag was pulled down from the wall of a temple. A Hindu family celebrating the festival of Ganesh Chaturthi was attacked. A Hindu man was almost stabbed and his aunt was punched in the nose. Now, moving on, Rashmi Samant is the first Indian to be elected as the president of the Oxford Student Union. She writes in her book titled A Hindu in Oxford about the experience of being singled out by her professors. She claimed that they questioned her holding the office of president, citing her religious and ethnic backgrounds.
Oxford students are not ready for a Hindu president. That's what he says. Whilst my campaign, my platform, my presence on campus was not based on my Hindu identity, it was based on my identity as a student of the university. And I think that's horribly racist.
And talking about the UK, even someone like Rishi Sunak, who went on to become Britain's first ethnic minority prime minister, was not spared. The characterization of Sunak as a quote-unquote cow worshipper is another Hindu-phobic slur. And in June this year, Sunak said that he was hurt and angry that a supporter of a far-right party had been recorded making a racial slur about him. He felt that it was too important for him not to speak out. So the question is, what do Shilpa Shetty, Rashmi Samant and Rishi Sunak have in common? They've all been subjected to Hinduphobia. But the problem is, few understand it. Now, first things first, to begin with, you should know that Hinduphobia is defined as a set of antagonistic, destructive and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Hinduism and Hindus alike that may manifest as prejudice, fear, or hatred. So, have the indiscriminate attacks on Hindus, most recently in Bangladesh, reached a tipping point? Is Hinduphobia on the rise? I spoke to Suhag Shukla and a former Indian diplomat, T.S. Tirumurthy, and this is what they have to say.
It's boiling over. We see that in 2 ways. First is Hinduphobia on the ground, and then Hinduphobia online, and both of those things are interrelated. On the ground, a good example is what we're seeing happening in Bangladesh today. And today, as we're seeing live footage. You'll see so-called fact checks where they'll cherry pick 2 or 3 examples of maybe footage that's being shared as if it's violence that's occurring today, but in actuality occurred maybe a few years ago, using those types of cherry-picked examples to somehow suggest that the targeted violence that's being faced by Hindus today is somehow lesser or not worthy of international outcry.
Over the last decade or more, we have had contemporary forms of religiophobia against non-Abrahamic religions, like hate against Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and others have exponentially increased. And you're seeing it, across, if you look around, you're seeing it everywhere. You have had the Bamiyan Buddha, for example, blasted to smithereens, and then you had the massacre of the Sikh pilgrims in Gurudwara in Afghanistan. You're seeing temples being attacked. You're seeing in our own neighborhood, the Hindus and others being targeted, and the Sikhs being targeted. So I think looking at all this, there was no doubt that hate crimes against non-Abrahamic religions increased, not just in our neighborhood, but also in the West.
Now, besides an outright denial that anything called Hinduphobia exists or is indeed growing in some parts of the world, the institutionalization of anti-Hindu bias by a section of the Indian diaspora itself makes it worse.
You're talking about people who are sympathizers of separatist movements, whether it's rooted to separatism in Kashmir or the Khalistan movement. You see a lot of anti-Hindu rhetoric. Some may claim, and some try to whitewash these attacks as political, but why are they then attacking Hindu institutions or individuals who are Hindus? Why are they engaging in anti-Hindu rhetoric that specifically attacks Hindu individuals, attacks certain practices that might be commonplace among some Hindu communities, like vegetarianism, or uttering different types of slurs, and again trying to equate caste oppression with the Hindu Dharma traditions?
That's not all. Attempts have been made in the US, for instance, to rake up caste discrimination, to project Hinduism and Hindus alike as oppressive. But opponents of such attempts say that it unfairly targets Hindus and people of Indian descent. In April 2024, a US lawmaker from the state of Michigan, Sri Thanedar, introduced a bill in the lower chamber of the US legislature for condemning Hinduphobia. Now, he says, and I quote, "We've experienced substantially more events of this kind in recent months, and I have a feeling that this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning of a very coordinated attempt against this community," unquote. According to US agency FBI's hate crimes statistics report, anti-Hindu hate crimes targeting temples and persons are rising in American society, as is Hinduphobia. No wonder then that in 2023, the US state of Georgia passed a resolution condemning Hinduphobia, making it the first US state to adopt such a legislative measure. And now to another question that many are wondering about. Why is Hinduphobia on the rise? I posed this question to Suhag Shukla.
I think that it's multifactorial, and some of those factors are: one, those people who hold anti-Hindu animus or anti-Hindu hatred are far more organized. There's also some institutional capture that's involved, so that where there are incidents of anti-Hindu atrocities, their machinery that is well embedded in legacy media, as well as the human rights industry, as well as in Western governments, that they will diminish what is happening to Hindus.
Incidentally, to counter exactly that is the whitewashing of anti-Hindu hatred, India has taken up this matter forcefully at the UN.
in the UN Security Council itself, when we were in the Security Council between 2021 and 22, our Minister of State in October 2021, he took it up and he said that we cannot ignore these contemporary forms of religiophobia against Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists. And he said, you will ignore it at your own peril.
Now, the UN has traditionally condemned phobias against Abrahamic religions, namely Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. But it does not speak in one voice against hateful attacks against other religions. And that, Ambassador Tirumurthy feels, needs to change.
This is a very divisive sort of trend which is coming on. It not only will divide the United Nations on religious lines, but it will also start dividing all of us on religious lines. And that is something which we have pointed out. And now, of course, you're seeing it in our own neighborhood. I can have no better example than what has happened in Bangladesh, for example, and the attack against the minority communities, particularly the Hindus. So I think this is something which, India is very clear that it has to be combated. And it has to be, something, a religiophobia by itself should be countered, as I said at the beginning. Yes, we have to counter it, but counter it holistically. And let us not divide ourselves on religious lines.
That said, could Hinduphobia also be a consequence of India's rise, which is envied by the world? Suhag Shukla says that as India rises, as it asserts more independence in decision-making, especially in the realm of foreign policy or even domestically, there's a lot of inaccurate and negative coverage in foreign media. And that negative coverage very often veers into Hinduphobia because the BJP is seen as a nationalist party.
I will say that the rise of Indians, and that is the rise of Indians world over, including the United States and Canada and the UK, that as a result of that, I do believe that we're seeing from nativist voices, kind of white nationalist voices, increasing rhetoric, expressing things that about Hinduism, and Indians being dirty and that sort of thing, but also that Indians are taking Westerners' jobs.
So in conclusion, let me just say, Hinduphobia is real. It is not a figment of one's imagination. It manifests itself in various forms. The trick is to know it when you see it. But for that to happen, one needs to understand what constitutes Hinduphobia. Two, the key to ensuring that anti-Hindu hate crimes are not repeated is knowing one's history. And three, survivors of anti-Hindu hatred must speak up, tell their story, document it for future generations. Right, so that was a deep dive into Hinduphobia, and now to our weekly poll where you, the viewer, get to have your say. We're asking you, after killings of Hindus in Bangladesh, it is time the world acknowledged anti-Hindu hatred just as it does anti-Semitism. Yes or no? What do you think? I repeat, after killings of Hindus in Bangladesh, it is time the world acknowledged anti-Hindu hatred just as it does anti-Semitism. Yes or no? Tell us what you think. You can post your replies on our social media accounts on Facebook, X, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. And on a programming note, you can watch the full interview of Suhag Shukla on our YouTube channel when we publish it online. It should be up sometime next week. Shukla is a co-founder and the executive director of the Washington, D.C.-based Hindu-American Foundation, and she speaks extensively on what Hinduphobia is all about, why it's spreading, and what can be done to combat it.